Look, guys, I know what they say. They say that you need an influx of money to start a business. They say that you need to know somebody that knows somebody to be able to start a business. That's incorrect, guys. That's overwhelming to us. And most of us, especially after a year like 2020, are not in the position to be able to do neither one of those things. So I've come up with the $300 startup toolkit to solve this problem. And I think it does that because the way I have set it up, you can start a business in as little as 48 hours and for as little as $300. So you don't need nothing crazy to get your vision out there. You don't need, this elaborate setup that's going to cost you thousands of dollars in order to get a WordPress website with hosting. I'm going to walk you through all that. I'm going to share my screen through all that so you can get to be able to get your business out there and control your own destiny. Because, like I said, guys, 2020 has shown us one thing, and is that we can't rely on our jobs. We can't rely on other things that are outside of us. We need to be able to make this happen for us. And the $300 startup toolkit is going to be able to get your business together fast enough for you to be able to have the chance to do just that. Take control of your destiny. So head on over to spotlightcoalition.com. And the top right, you're going to see the $300 startup toolkit. And that's going to get you started on the path to eventually starting your own business, your own side hustle, your own income, your own destiny. Take care, guys. On to the show. Hey, everyone, and thanks for joining me for another great conversation. As always, I appreciate you guys. My next guest was such a pleasure to talk to. She knows leadership in and out. She knows how to handle anxiety. She knows how to handle fear. And she does one of the toughest jobs that anybody in our community has to do. And that's help raise young adults so they can see the power in themselves and gain leadership skills. I introduce to you the extremely powerful and extremely humbling Barbara San Roman. Live. Let me check these questions out in the corner. All right, and we're good. Hey, Barbara, thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate anybody that's willing to give up the time to just conversate with me.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it. Just kind of seeing what we can get into today.
Awesome, cool. Yeah, I think this conversation, I'm excited for this conversation because I have two teenagers of my own. So I think this is going to hit very close to home on a lot of these topics. And that's what got me so excited to talk to you. But before we go into all that, please explain a little bit about yourself for the listeners.
Yeah, so my name's Barbara. I am currently out of Chicago, living in Chicago. I currently work on the southeast side of Chicago. As was there as a resident principal, then assistant principal, and then now principal at a high school, predominantly Latino and Black. Really have a phenomenal staff, phenomenal community. We're what we call like a neighborhood high school.
Yep.
So we serve the community that is around us. And this past July, I just got my contract. So in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of like a social movement and uprising, like also stepping into this role of leadership, which is it's been very interesting and
Yeah.
at the same time, exciting, but learning along the way.
Yeah, congratulations on that, by the way. That's
Thank you.
incredible. Yeah, and a year where you usually hear just sour, news and sour grapes and stuff, it's always good to hear some positive going on.
Yeah.
So I've always been fascinated, not always, but recently, as of recently, with my teenagers, I think about a lot about how more complex and difficult it is for them than it was for me when I was a teenager, and how many things they have to stay away from and distractions they have to avoid. So, how is it that you help teenagers? What is your main purpose? I mean, besides being a principal, how is it that you're helping these teenagers nowadays?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting to frame it in that way. Even in thinking about your own children. And I think that now working with youth, they're so much so powerful, and their voice is so powerful, and they say things and speak out in ways that like I never would have or could, or like
Right.
just so bold in ways, and things that they're passionate for. And I think that that is so beautiful to see in that way. And I think that when I'm thinking about myself and my work, it's like every step of the way, every step of my journey to get to from where I started to where I'm at now, it was always like somebody else seeing that in me and being like, Barb, like apply for this or do this, and I'm like, absolutely not. That sounds like a terrible idea. Or I don't want to do this in any way. And they're like, no, you have to. Like, you absolutely need to be in this role or in this program. And it's that trust that I had in that person to see that in me before I even saw it in myself. And obviously I see it myself now because I'm in this role and in this program and everything. But that's really my main goal, in working with youth and working with students, is like to support them, build trust with them, build relationships with them so that they see what we see in them. Like, so that they
Yeah.
see the power that they have, they see that potential that they have. And, I think that starts from not just in their academics, but like in their identity, in the beauty in their culture, in, how do you fit into this school? Thinking that they're academics, thinking that they're smart. Like, that is something that you have to believe and instill in yourself. And, working in schools, that's something that we're sometimes working against. Like, the school itself is not necessarily, the system itself is not necessarily always designed to be like, yes, we want every kid is going to make it through. So we almost have to like deconstruct systems to
Yeah.
ensure that, yeah, our kids are going to win at the end.
Yeah, I'm interested in those systems. I know that before the show, in the show notes, you gave me you talked about a structure that's basically oppressing students. Now, it's easy to see that in the news and in the world and what's going on, but not many people think about that that's happening in our school systems. Can you give a little bit of more of what those oppressions are?
Yeah, yeah. And I'll use myself as an example, and I use this example with our staff as well, where our staff is about 100 teachers and about 30 additional support staff members, and we're engaging in a lot of learning in like understanding exactly your question, right? Like, what are these systems? How do they live in the school? And like, how are they harming our students? How are we doing harm to children?
Yeah.
And when I think of my own experiences growing up, part of my schooling was done in Miami, and part of it was done in a predominantly white area in the Midwest. And when I was there, when I was in a more predominantly white school, I would, I don't know, this is like middle school, right? Elementary school, middle school, like
Okay.
flick back my hair, like do not want to appear in any way cultural or like different or like Spanish in any way, would not speak Spanish.
Wow.
I remember that I had to do this project about my culture, and I'm Peruvian, by the way.
Okay.
And I decided that I wanted to like do my project on how we were French, and my mom was like, like kind of, but
Yeah.
no, and no, you're not doing that. So I had a very parallel experience. Like, I was able to be myself at home. I was able to have rich culture, beauty, like music, family, all of these things that make our people. And at school, I was like this different person.
Gotcha.
And I think it's important to note that in my own experience, because it's like, in no way did anybody ever say, Barbara, you can't speak Spanish. Barbara, you need to look like this. You need to do this. But over time, I learned that to be a part of something, to be a part of my school, to be a part of this classroom, I had to appear physically, emotionally,
Yeah.
linguistically, like a certain way.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I think, and I use that example even with our staff, because I was like, if you can't tell me that like that's harmful, like that's harmful to children.
Absolutely.
And I was what, like 11, 12. And we think that like this white supremacy culture, we think it always looks like things like the Capitol, right? Like that's
Yeah.
where our mind goes to. And it's almost scary because the main things that cause harm are the ones that we don't really see. Like, they're just there. It's normal. It's part of our culture. And what it does is it tells kids they don't belong. It tells kids you can't be smart here. You can't, the things you do at home, leave it at home. You can't do that here.
Right.
It's not true. And it's just not right. Like, you see people that are super successful have a very, very, very strong foundation in who they are, in who they like believe themselves to be. And if we look at traditional schooling,
Yeah.
it asks to tell kids to not be themselves. And
Yeah.
in my opinion, that is the most harmful thing that you can do to a human being, but definitely
Yeah.
a child.
Yeah. Now, how much of that is, in your opinion, like the specific staff, like, the superintendent of an area that's running this stuff? And how much of that do you think is just old, the legacy system of that's just built in?
In my opinion, I think that the people that I've had the pleasure of working with, like
Hmm.
over my career, it almost like takes them twice as hard to try to go against what you're saying. Like historically, the system has been in place, it is there. And now, like the people that are in front of kids, the people that are working with kids, it almost takes two or three times as much to be like, okay, we have to do this, but also this, but also this,
Right.
to ensure that it's historical. It's like you said, this system that was put in place years and years and years ago for a certain purpose, and it doesn't necessarily work for all kids,
Right.
and that's by design, so if we want to make sure that all of our students are succeeding and all of our children believe in themselves, it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of work.
Definitely sounds like it. I'm so intrigued at what you're talking about, and I could just use myself as an example. I didn't get the double experience that you did, but I only got the one experience of, like you said, trying to fit in, right, and trying to be quote unquote, with the white kids. And
Mhm.
I'm Puerto Rican, so I'm a little bit more. I'm a citizen, but not as equal to, according to paperwork. But now that you say it, I could see where later on in my life, when I turned into my 20s and when I got into my 20s, like the early 20s, I didn't really know who the heck it was that I was. Right. And my parents would always come to me and, joking around. The family joke was just like, oh, while we're over here getting, some totones and stuff like that, you want McDonald's because you're the white boy, quote unquote. And I never knew that was never forced upon me by my parents because, like you said, at home, I was just me. But it was just one of those things that over time I didn't know this was happening until I got older. And it was, oh, crap. I tried to fit in this system so much that I no longer know who I am.
Mhm.
And it's
Mhm.
so interesting that you nailed that right on the head. Um, and I want to go back to what you're saying. You want to show these kids that they have value. Now, for a person to know what their worth and their value is, do you think that that's just a teenage problem that people struggle with, or just in general a human problem?
I think it's a human problem. I think
Okay.
that, I was definitely well into adulthood, and people are still like, I still have mentors and coaches that are like, I see this for you. Like this is what's next for you.
Okay.
And I think that I, and again, new into this role, but I've been at this school for a few years now. And then prior to that, even as a teacher, I feel like this development of potential, like you can tap that in anyone.
Okay.
And that's something that I really like to work with, our staff, specific staff members, like, okay, like, let's do this. Like, this is a project that you really want. Like, let's get excited about that together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And take that on. And really, I think it's a lot of believing in people, believing in the right things. I think that everyone needs kind of like a partner to their work, right? Like somebody, you're doing this, and you need somebody to be like, "Yep, that's it. You got this. You're gonna kill this." And I think a lot of that is not just embedded in schools, but like schools are also a larger reflection of society. Like society has social norms and beauty norms and timeline. You need to be here, 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 and adults take that in,
Right.
or they set things that they need to do, and you don't hit that by a certain age or by a certain time, and like, so I think that there's a lot of social pressure that is put on adults, and a lot of social pressure that then gets put on students, and
Right.
children and youth, and it's like, well, you need to be a certain way, or you need to do this, and it's harmful, and I think it's really damaging to like the process of believing in yourself
Yeah.
is very long.
Yeah.
And I feel like there are probably
Endless.
yeah, endless. There are
Yeah. Yeah.
probably people that you and I know that are still on that journey and are struggling. And I think that when we're working with children, we're working with youth, the further along that we can get them there before they leave our school, the better off we are, the better off society is, the better off like everyone is, especially
Right.
them.
Right. So instead of figuring out who they are later in life, they have a head start on that jump.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Gotcha. All right. Now, specifically, I could only speak in like the male youth, but do you find a lot of testosterone? Kids are getting old. Do you find a lot of ego lashback in the sense that they won't take your praises, if that makes sense? Like if you believe in them and you're giving them opportunities, but they think you're blowing smoke. Do you get that a lot?
I think that not necessarily. I
Okay.
think that what you do see is like if there isn't a relationship there, or like there's no trust there, or the person doesn't know you, the kid doesn't know you, and like think I would probably respond in the same way. What are you talking to me about? Like what are you doing?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
Um, but I think that question also underscores the importance of like building those relationships, and that's something
right.
that we're really working on with our teachers, right? Like it's not just about the curriculum and the skills that we teach, but we have to really build those relationships over time to say, like, this is why we're learning about this. This is why we're learning about this together. I want to hear your opinion. I want you to hear mine. Like, I want to engage in learning together. And I think that if you build those relationships, you have less of kind of what you shared. Um, but I think that I haven't really experienced that, but I
Okay.
would say, like, in spaces that it does really exist, um, definitely, I would say there's maybe like a lack of trust or a lack of relationship there for sure.
Sure. Okay. Now, how and what different strategies are you using to build these relationships? Because I'll be honest, when I was in high school, the principal was the last person that I
Right.
wanted to see walking down the hall. So, what
That's
kind of ways?
true. Yeah, no, so one of the things that's awesome, yeah, we'll always joke about that. Like, okay, let's make this like we're gonna have a conversation, but I promise to tell you beforehand that it's not bad.
Okay. You gotta give him a disclaimer.
Yeah, sometimes we definitely have to lead with that. So one example of that we started in myself and one of our counselors started, it was this program called Rooted. So we started a mentorship and leadership program. It originally started to like have upperclassmen mentor underclassmen. Like,
Okay.
hey, here's what it's like being a student here, here's what you can experience. And what it really turned into is almost like a leadership development program. And we have students that were like, we would ask them to be on panels. They were talking to people in the community. They were talking to eighth graders that were interested in coming to our school. And all of this would happen in like a group setting. So each of us had like a little network or a pod of like 8 to 10 students.
Okay.
So each of the staff members, we'd meet weekly. And then we'd also come together once a month and we'd say, okay, we're gonna have dinner together. We buy them food. Pizza can get a lot done. If you order some pizza, you can get students to show up, parents,
Oh
staff.
yeah.
So we got some pizza, we got some food, and we would do like dinner, almost like a family dinner, like once a month.
Nice.
And these sessions started to be led by students, and like watching them just lead a group of close to 100 kids and maybe 20 staff members, and they put an agenda together and they were coordinating and organizing. And it's through those regular interactions, right? Like, so now I'm meeting with my group once a week. I'm meeting with this larger group once a month. We're at the door, in the morning, in the hallway, in the lunchroom, in classrooms. And I think that goes back to um, the idea behind trust and relationship, right? If I wasn't in those spaces, if I wasn't building intentional relationships with our students, with our families, that the work that like we want to do definitely wouldn't be able to get done.
Right. Right.
So yeah, that like being vulnerable, practicing vulnerability in front of students, also just being with them, I think is something that's really important to me. And it allows students to open up and share things that we need as a school, things that they need as a person, and things that they need in the classroom.
Yeah. Now, is this happening? I mean, I know you said you had dinner, so after class, is any of this happening during school, or is this just more
Yeah,
extracurricular?
so we'll check in sometimes during like their lunch periods, or sometimes we would meet as a group during lunch,
Okay.
and then like the dinners would be after school.
Nice. And is it like a prerequisite for you to be able to join? Do you have to keep your grades up, or is it just, hey, if you just want to hang out with us?
Yeah, that's a good question. In the beginning, we kind of were like, okay, do we need to have the grade thing? And then we're like, no, because then there could be some students that need support with their grades, and that this could be something that could support them to do that.
Okay.
So we don't have any prerequisites like that. The only thing that we really ask is that they continue to show up. And it's like, if you're committing to this, you're committing to it like a sport or a club. And when we have these events, when we come together as a group, we just ask that they continue to show up, and they do, or they communicate that like I have basketball practice or I have like a swim meet, and like we get that because we want students to be engaged in everything.
Right.
I think it's a little bit of a balance of both for sure.
Okay. Now, how if you don't have to give an exact percentage, are you dealing with primarily minorities? Because I've never been to Chicago, but I hear Southside Chicago, it's not the friendliest of places. Is the best way to put it. So are they minorities? Are they from low income homes for the most part,
Yeah.
or
So our school is it's predominantly Latino. So we have about I'm gonna say like 84, 85% Latino, then
nice?
about 5 to 8% black, and the rest is like mixed race, white, Pacific Islander, things like that. And I would
Gotcha.
say that about 85, 86% of our school is free and reduced lunch. So we
Okay.
definitely, yeah, definitely, have that title. And that's definitely something that, not being originally from Chicago, that's definitely something that's heard, right? Like,
Yeah.
what is the South Side like? Like, what is it like working there? What does
Yeah.
that look like? And I think that once, like, I started to work in schools, and once I started to work and also live, not right now, but previously, whenever I was a teacher, I lived in the community that I worked in. That one was predominantly Latino as well. You really saw the beauty of that community. You really saw the beauty of like Black and Brown people and what it
Nice.
means when we come together. What it means when you you have like the moms coming by making food for the kids when we're doing different events, setting up things for them. And I think that that's part of what our students like, even something you mentioned, right? Like an understanding of the South Side of Chicago. Like our students know that as well, right? Our students
Yeah.
know how the world labels them and perceives them and puts these things on them. And I think that part of that is like them fighting back to say like, no, this is who we are, this is what our school is, this is what we stand for. But we do definitely like fight a lot of identity before they come into the school. Like we really are shifting so that students are proud to come to our school.
Okay.
And I think you see that with a lot of schools in Chicago as well. Like there's a choice system, so they almost like apply their 8th grade year to go to a high school. And if it's
Interesting.
outside of their neighborhood, then they could be denied. Like it's almost like they're going to college, but they're 8th graders. So
Wow.
that process is super stressful. Like kids are it's very stressful. It's very stressful for students to go through that
Sounds
process.
like it.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of that is, and a lot of like what I see my work doing is like um, shifting some of that, not just for the world to see our students in a different way, but also for our students to see themselves in a different way. Like, let's look at what are things that we can be proud about? Like, what are things that are beautiful within our community? And part of that is like, if we see that in ourselves and we see that in our school, then shame on the world for not seeing that in us, right? Like,
Right.
so,
Absolutely.
but it has to start with us. And you see this with schools in school areas, probably, similar to Chicago, probably in New York or in LA or in Miami. You see these bigger urban districts, and definitely stereotypes that are placed on those districts. And like, that's
Yeah.
real. That's absolutely real.
Yeah. Is it difficult? Have you found in the past to keep the because you're in the community and these kids are reflective of their community. But I grew up in a community where, and I'm aging myself. I'm 34, so it could be different now. But where you basically either were really good in school or you were a hustler, right? And you respected these hustlers, and so the question is do you see that it's difficult to keep the kids focused on the positivity that you guys are providing as opposed to what's going on in their community on the streets? Is that a difficult thing to
Yeah,
distract them from?
no, I think that's great to bring up. And I think that, even though we want kids to be proud and we want kids to be happy and we want, peace and joy and love and happiness, I think
Right.
that we also really want to address the reality of what's going on. And that definitely happens, right? Like we understand that there are certain things that are happening outside, like within the neighborhood, like things happen within the neighborhood,
Right.
outside of the school. And we are um, lucky and also been working on this really hard to have a strong team of people that's responsive of that. So between counselors, social workers, things like that that provide mental health supports for students, those are some of the things that we really pride ourselves in. Like, it's not just academics, but we also need counseling and therapy and support in that sense, because there's a very, very, very real reality outside of our school building. And
Yes.
we definitely, I think, pride ourselves in that like sense of pride in our school without saying, well, we're ignoring what's going on, right? Like, we have to address it. We have to look at, so I think that what you're naming is definitely something that we've seen, experienced on a pretty regular basis,
Okay.
But I would say schools that address that well, schools in different areas, in different cities. I've seen this happen to where you have a student that is experiencing trauma, is living in poverty, has moved, has changes in their family, in their household, and they come to school and like show up a certain in response to what they're experiencing at home,
Right.
and that sometimes leads to a not very supportive environment. They may be kicked out of class. They may be, you know, in school suspension, getting in detention, like, because they're not complying to what school is telling them they need to do. Like, no, you can't put your head down. You pick your head up. You need to do all these things.
Right.
And I think that, again, super, super, super grateful that the schools that I've worked at have been very responsive to trauma. Like, we need to understand trauma. We need to understand what that looks like. And if you don't, you lead to like schools that are just are policing kids essentially in the
You're
class.
right.
Um,
Dangerous.
and that's really, it's very dangerous. It's very hard to see. And I think that when students start to experience school in that way, that's where we get to this very explicit, like, you are now telling a child that they don't belong here over and over and over and over and over again.
Right.
And then the likeliness for them to make it to that finish line and like finish school and possibly go on to something, um, it like decreases every little bit. It's almost like chipping away at that. So I absolutely think that trauma informed teaching in the classroom, it's something that we're constantly working on, constantly learning. But I've seen and heard from other schools where it just doesn't exist in that same way, and it's really sad. Like, it's
It,
really sad to see.
it really is sad. Now, I grew up in a culture where therapy was basically laughable,
Mhm.
and it wasn't even a common thing. Walk me through explaining to a teenager that is blossoming, for better lack of a word, and has probably heard from his fellas or from his family that therapy is a joke. How do you walk
Yeah,
a student through that?
yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, there may not be one answer either.
No, and I think that that's a stigma, that I grew up in, that my family grew up in, like, around like the Black and Latino community, that you just figure it out and like
Yep.
you man up or woman up and like you'll
Yep.
be fine. Like, it's fine. You're gonna be okay. But I think that we're learning that's like not the case, right? Like, that's not the case. And we are like, aside from doing workshops and stuff with our staff, you're hearing that a lot of our parents are starting to ask the same question. Like, okay, there's something going on. Something has happened. There has been a shift in my son, and like, I don't know how to help him, and like, I need help. So I
Yeah.
think that one of the things that you're hearing now, from like larger mental health movements that are happening in our world, is that our parents are also more open to, whereas like they may have grown up in the most strict household,
Yeah.
that like, mental health is really not a thing where they grew up. And now they're really asking for help for their child, and like, they want different for their child than what they had, even though they don't know the answer yet. um,
Yes.
so I think that that's like important to name, that we're seeing in our parents, like, can we do a workshop on anxiety or on depression, or what are signs that this is happening? So that's definitely one thing. And the second thing is, when we're considering who we're hiring and who we're putting in front of our kids and who, everything that we're doing, we have to also see and bring forth positive male role models in front of our boys.
Okay.
And like that's something that, and then like supporting those male role models to be vulnerable, to be, they can talk about how they're stressed. They can talk about how this is unmanageable, how they were supposed to get all these things done and they didn't get anything done. And like, what does that then lead to? So I think that we have some pretty phenomenal male role models in our school, that are open to being vulnerable, that are open to saying let's go talk, let's just go eat like a snack, like let's go have
Yeah.
lunch, so it's not so much you need to go to therapy, as much as it's like, hey, if you're my counselor and like I've opened up to you and I've told you things, it's almost like, hey, can I come like share some more? And like now I know and I'm registering that I'm stressed, so I need to come talk to you. So
Yeah,
then
gotcha.
what we start to see is the kids almost self-identify themselves, and they start to recognize like, okay, I need help. I need to go seek help. But
Bingo.
yeah, that is very true. It's mental health is absolutely a stigma, and I think that the more that we can support students to be like, yes, you can absolutely talk to a therapist, you can talk to a social worker, and that's great. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I think you nailed it on the head with the self-discovery, and that just happens to me on my own. So I grew up, like I said, in a household that didn't believe in that stuff. Um, I kind of was the forerunner in my family to actually go and get therapy myself because I just saw it as a way to just exercise the mind and get some stuff out. But like you said, I can't, and I smile now because I think about it. I can't count the many times I went in there with a problem, and just because I spoke about it, I figured it out on my own.
yeah.
It's like gold. There's just that eureka moment, and I have to smile. But I've gone on to be such a big advocate of therapy for everybody, but my two teenagers as well are seeing a therapist once a week or so, or once every other week at the most. And it's because of that. I want them to have that same eureka moment. I don't want them to have the stigma. And like you said, I want them to have better, because it gets to the point where at least my teenagers, I feel like they hold a lot of information away from me, and it scares me just to think that even if I have the tools to help personally, they wouldn't trust me anyways for me to be able to use those tools. So
Mm-hmm.
if they can go to somebody else and get the tools, I'm all for that. Would you agree with that?
No, absolutely. And I think that there's definitely a shift in, when they become teenagers, and then it's like I don't have any kids of my own, but I have sisters that are teenagers or were very recently teenagers.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a shift, from when they're sixth, seventh grade, and then all of a sudden, hormones,
Oh yeah.
everything kicks in, and you want to make sure that you're gonna hit a wall. Things are gonna be difficult, and I think that's great that you're modeling that and you're saying like this is normal. Like this is like we're going to the doctor.
Yeah.
Your head hurts. This is what we're doing. And I really think that even with like you as a father modeling that and saying this is what I've done, this is just what we do. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like that is so beautiful, not just because it normalizes mental health, but because you're validating their feelings. Like you're saying you feel this way and that's real, and like we're gonna work on that. Like at no point would you tell somebody that like broke their arm, like, are you sure you broke your arm? I don't think you broke your arm. Like that
Yeah.
seems even
Yeah.
true. But in society, like like we were talking earlier, there are these models that we have to fill and be, and like mental health is better now, I would say, than it was before, but definitely a lot of work to do, just as a society in normalizing mental health, getting mental health resources specifically for our Black and Brown communities, and like I guess society as a whole as well.
Yeah, sure. I agree with that 100%. So the anxiety and mental health in the leadership role. I know
Yeah.
you gave me that in the pre notes.
Mm-hmm.
Explain that to me. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think that, and this goes kind of on this like journey and talking about mental health and talking about mental health for students. I think that there's definitely other people that I work with that are also in leadership roles, and I think that there is definitely like a need to talk about mental health and anxiety and like stress and pressure more openly
Yeah.
in sense. But mainly just, I would say, when you're thinking about leadership, when I'm talking to people about not just the principalship, but other people in different sectors, like they work in technology or they work in, you know, any different sector. I think there's this stigma of, before you take this step, you have to have all of your ducks in a row. You have
Right.
to have this, you have to have that, you have to like do all of these things, go to all of these classes. And like the anxiety behind that, or like getting within our head essentially, is really that part that limits us and that holds us back, is like ourselves. um
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think that idea of just like overthinking, we are putting ourselves, and limiting ourselves in a sense of like, maybe this woman or this girl could take on this role, or maybe this guy could take on this role, but because there are these larger social pressures to do X, Y, and Z, we don't take that first step. Or we don't take that, we don't apply for the job. We say, oh, there's so many more people that could do that are more qualified.
Right.
And I think that coming into this role, I've really pushed myself in some of the things we were talking about earlier. And you can hear my dog in the background. He's just going out. Just
I
ignore him.
got one up there too.
Yeah, yeah. In like putting yourself out there in the same way that I support other people, like I have to do that for myself. In
Yeah.
the same way that other people have pushed me, I have to push myself. And there's definitely a lot of like anxiety and stress behind that. But I think there's power to that. I think that, I always read things that say like take that first step before you're ready.
Yeah.
Speak out before you're ready, or speak out when your voice is shaking or when you're nervous. And I
Right.
think that practicing that now for me is one of the things that I find to be like, okay, this is something that we're working on, like constantly working on. Because opening up parts of yourself and being vulnerable, I believe, and I firmly believe, is what leads to change. Like when
Yeah.
people share their story and share what they value and share their core values, like that's how we move. That's how we, inspire and like hold on to hope. Versus being like this super dry person and this cold person that has no story, and like we're just like, this is what we're doing. But
Yeah.
I do think that when you practice vulnerability, and when you practice being, you know, a little bit more vulnerable than what you're used to, versus showing up as this perfect person every day, it's nerve wracking. Like you are literally like putting yourself out there in front of all these people, and you're like, they may not like me, and you have to get out of your head that it's like, well, then they may not like you. Like,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
gonna be fine, and you're gonna be okay. Um, but yeah, really, really around that. And I think that hearing other people's stories, and I'm sure you hear so many people's stories,
I
like
do.
how do you not limit yourself,
Right.
because of like anxiety and stress and overthinking, and am I going to mess this up, fear of failure, like all of those things are in my head, and it's like,
Yeah.
no, you have to do it, like do this, share this. But it's super scary.
Yeah, I use a few different ways to walk myself out of that stuff. A famous philosopher, Seneca, said, I believe it was Seneca, we often suffer in imagination than we do in reality. And I think I do that all the time. We start perceiving this, like you said, crazy. They're gonna hate it, this and that, and we're just making ourselves suffer because in reality, people are perfectly fine with it.
Yeah.
But it's I heard somebody else also tell me about fear, that it's the compass, right? It's like I asked a person on this podcast, I was like, hey, how do you handle fear? How do you address fear? And he very nonchalantly told me that's the direction for me to go. Like it's building in there, but I know if I go through with it, it's gonna put me in a much better position than if I walk away from it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's super huge, definitely. So would you agree that there's no such thing as leadership without fear and anxiety?
Absolutely. You should know that. We should start with that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
And you gotta step into it. Like the last person you were saying, like whenever you start to feel that, you like physically are feeling like, oh my, oh my God, we gotta stop.
yeah, push
That's
through.
real. And like that is where you grow. And that is where you find yourself, and where other people connect to you. And without that, we don't have anything. Like without that human connection,
Right.
like that's what we really, really, really need to focus on. And part of that is terrifying.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I would be hard pressed to not ask a principal how she and her students have handled COVID. So, how do you feel about COVID in general? And then I want to kind of nail in a little bit on how do you feel in regards to it damaging kids for the long term, if you may.
Yeah. So we have, and I'll share this because I know different schools are in different places. So since last March, we've been remote. So we've been completely remote, which means that our teachers are at home, our students are at home, and they've been for the second half of last semester and basically all of this year have been learning online.
Yes.
Um, yeah, so it's a lot. We since last year we're almost using a similar model that we're using right now. And like the kids log in at a certain time with their teacher. So at least we have that. They're not like on their own. But I think that two things that have really come up. So our kids are logging in, like our attendance is good. We have a good like connection with our families, with our students. But one of the things that we're really finding through COVID is again going one like super 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 high needs in regards to mental health, and this is something that we're seeing with students that were super high performers, like
Okay.
academically they were knocking it out of the park by themselves, like they're fine.
Wow.
And the need for we hear this with our students, like you have missing assignments, you have all of these things that you have to do, they're not turning stuff in, we're like, do you need help, what do you need? They're like, no, like I know what I need to do, and I know that I can do it, I just like can't get myself to do it.
Right.
And I feel like a lot of that is our teachers and our staff really acknowledging that and like validating that when mom's calling and she's like, I need him to be in class, but he cannot get out of bed. Like he hasn't gotten out of bed. Like that's real. And we've seen that more than ever, like more than ever. People just reaching out like kids, parents, like I don't know what to do. And I don't know like what this is. Like I don't know what I'm feeling because I've never felt it before.
Right.
So I think that that is almost like the impact of the quarantine,
Yeah. Yeah.
of that people, which is good, like people are following guidelines and they're staying in their house and they're being safe, but COVID itself, we've had a high, like probably our area has had one of like the highest positivity rates
Okay.
within our city, at different times. So we've done a lot of just connecting with families, like what do you need, right, like food.
Yeah.
Our teachers did a like a mutual, like basically like a mutual fund, for, or mutual aid I should say,
Yep.
for our community. So like giving out grants and giving out like, do you need to pay your rent this month? So you saw a lot of people organizing and coming together for the same reason. Like people are losing their homes, people don't have food, it's cold outside, and like I'm getting phone calls like they don't have coats, right, they just got here. And then
Yeah.
we have people rallying together like let's get them what they need, which I would say is speaks to how schools, like in communities like mine, in good schools in communities like mine normally operate,
Yeah.
is like what do our parents need, what do our families need, let's do that. But I think that with COVID you saw it in a lot more homes and a lot more for the things that are considered essential, like food.
Right.
um, we got to get our families food. Like
Yeah.
we can't expect kids to learn if they don't have any food. So
Right.
you see, we've done a couple drives, we've done some COVID testing. There's a different places where our like pantries and stuff where families can go in the neighborhood. But I would say the things that we saw um, are almost like amplified now during
Yeah.
COVID.
Yeah, has it affected your meetups? Because I could imagine, like we were talking earlier, the relationships that you're trying to establish, and now they're not happening. Are these meetups
Yeah,
happening still? Or?
yeah. Um, Absolutely. We have, our incoming freshmen, we've never met them. Like we've
Oh,
never met them in person. And
jeez.
we even do like a summer program where we do college visits and they go to like um well, I'll name stuff in Chicago, but it's like Chicago tourist stuff. And
Yeah.
they'll go there in the summer. Like it's so fun. We had to do that online and we've never met them. And so some of the things that our freshmen wouldn't normally struggle with, like
Yeah.
they're struggling with. And we still pop into classes and we, still are trying to get a gauge on what's this experience so we can support our staff and our students. So you'll see in some classes, like even some kids actually maybe thriving because they're normally quiet in class, but they're like in the chat talking to the teacher and they're doing really great. So there are some good things that we're doing a lot of learning in remote learning. But yeah, that's I would say that's to your second question. The long-term impact is really going to be with probably our like freshmen for the next few years to come, our seniors for the next few years to come that like not just didn't have all of the things they need to do to apply to these places they want to go to, but like they didn't have prom last year.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't have, so some of those things that are memorable for our students are almost like heartbreaking to take away from them.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it will, it will work out. We'll figure it out as we go through, and our district's putting a plan in place to figure out how we can start returning, what that vaccine distribution looks like. So it's definitely moving forward. But I think that like the most long-term impacts, like school and academics and the skills that they're working on, we can very easily get a gauge of where they're at. Like we
Right.
can do that. We could do that well. What I don't know is the impact of mental health over the course of like almost a year when they return back to us, and then like do we have the appropriate supports to respond to that well?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that we really don't know. We really don't know.
Yeah, I'm extremely worried. Along with my teenagers, I have a 10-year-old little girl, and just really worried about her when it comes to just being with her peers. I think a huge part of my experience in public schools when I was growing up wasn't necessarily what I was learning in the classroom. It was definitely what I was doing with my friends, right, and how
Yep.
I related and how I was social and stuff like that. So I'm extremely worried for her because I'm scared that this depression will stoop down to a 10-year-old if it hasn't already. And my wife and I are doing our best to definitely try to quell that. But and her social skills, right? Like now she's trapped in a house with adults, if you think about it, and teenagers, and nobody that's her age. And I'm super worried about that for the long run. So if I were to ask your opinion, because I'm sure everybody's different, how much of it are you with, hey, this is safety and this is something to be done, and hey, we're robbing these kids of something that we could never give them back? Where do you fall in that line?
Yeah, I think that kind of like where we're at as a district right now is ensuring that we do, like we definitely were one of the districts that waited
Yeah.
to come back, and I do think that that's important. We even like as a district we asked our parents who wants to come back and who doesn't, and you saw a lot of parents still like that really do because they need them to be in school, and then a lot of parents that also were like, I'm scared to send them to school because I don't know what's going to happen. So I think that the safety is definitely first. Like we definitely need to make sure that safety is there. We at this point have air purifiers, if not two, in every classroom. We have enough masks. We have, enough hand sanitizer for a very long time, wipes, like all of those things that we needed that we didn't really know about COVID before. We didn't really have at a school. We definitely needed those things, and we have
Right.
those now. Now I think it's really just going to be when they do come back, and we know that they are going to come back eventually. I think it's important, and we can, welcome our students with open arms. But what is that experience going to look like, right? Like, is it
Right.
still going to be just two or three kids in a class? Are they going to be able to have lunch together? So things like that, we're trying to find exactly what you named, like the social part of school, of high school, that everyone like
Right.
loves and remembers. How do we still capture some of that when we do return?
Right, right. So the next generation isn't pretty much just zombies. It's
Yeah.
and that's what I'm kind of scared of. I should have asked you this question earlier, but I'm definitely interested now as a principal, who's obviously doing a lot to empower her children and want to continue to do that. How much are you limited by the state of Chicago or by the district, and how much is in your control? How much is out of your control?
Yeah. Um, so in Chicago, we're one of the districts that even just certain things around school, like hiring and budgeting, those are within the control of the principal. So
Okay.
that's something that's really cool. That's different than other districts. Like even if you just look in the suburbs, um, that's in the hands of the superintendent. So in a city like Chicago, there's a lot of like more local control within our community with the principal at that school, and it allows us to do the things that we need to do.
Right.
I also think that as a district, and definitely as a school, we're like grounding ourselves as a school in social justice, what it means for our students, what it means for like what they're learning, what it means for what books they're reading, what it means for like, are you asking kids to lead their group or are you just talking to them the whole time? So those are some things that we are able to like, we have control to impact the curriculum, which I think is great.
Right.
And also proud to be a part of a larger district that also holds a lot of these values at their core. And I talk to leaders, in different places, and they're having a very different experience. I'm, talking to people right now that are in not in a principal role, but in different leadership roles in different areas, different districts, and they're like really trying to create movement and change, even just within their school, to support Black and Brown youth in these larger school settings, and are having a very, very, very difficult job doing that and like getting support and getting backing, and they're leaving. Like these
Yeah.
are conversations that I have so often. So I recognize that like I love my school and I love working there and I love the community, but that's not the experience for a lot of other educators. And that's not the experience for all other principals either. So I really appreciate being part of that, this larger organization that values the same things I value.
Right.
And also doing that more explicitly. Like we got to hold up the mirror and we got to see what like we're doing that's harming students, right? We can't just name it all to the system. There are things
Love
that
it.
we're doing within our school that we have to name, and we got to work on, and we are. So I think that if we're unable to do that, or schools or organizations are unable to do that, it makes the road a lot more difficult. I guess not impossible, but
Right.
it does make it a lot more difficult.
I love it. So in a selfish world, you're selfless. Is that something that you built over time, or is that something you were taught by your parents, or how are you? Why are you so giving and so selfless in your day to day?
I think that part of that is like I'm I know that I'm motivated by connecting with people. Like it's like a when you win, we like, or when we win, we all win type model. And I think that absolutely is how I was raised. I think that that's part of our culture as well. I think that that's part of like how my family operates. It's kind of like I was reading something the other day, like how often do you bring somebody else's name up when you're at the quote unquote table, right? Or how
Yeah.
often do you bring somebody in? And I think that that role of like connecting people and bringing people together and like bringing ideas together, um, that makes me like that re-energizes me, that keeps me alive, that like moves me forward. And if I don't have that, then if it's just me, then it's kind of boring. So I think it's really more that it's energizing and it's re-energizing. And you meet people and you have conversations like this, and it keeps you hopeful and it keeps you moving. And I think that's kind of why. um yeah, that's kind of why.
Yeah, that's awesome. In your opinion, since you engage these teenagers to be leaders, what are the characteristics of a teenage leader?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, I think the first one, and maybe they don't do it right away, is their ability to take risks. Like
Okay.
I remember this student that I would put him on a panel from his like sophomore year that he's talking to like 40 people, and he's like, nope, I don't want to do it. I do not want to do it. I am not going up there. And I was like, yes, you are. You are going to go sit up there and talk to these people, and and it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. And they'll, by their senior year, are like, I still remember when you had me going up there and I didn't want to do it. And now they're just like, now they can't stop talking. Like now
Yeah.
they're just in the moment. They are the star of the show. But I think it's really the ability to take risks, If you're willing to do that, that's probably also a quality in like an adult leader.
Sure. Yeah.
Ability to take risks, ability to listen to others, and ability to work with others. So I think that again, those can probably be the same for adults. But one of the things that like we work with our youth and with our youth leaders on is like when you're in a group setting, when you're in a team setting, um, are you just listening to somebody so that you can respond and you can tell them your idea, or are you actually listening to them to
Right.
listen to them,
Yeah.
right? Like be quiet and listen
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
them. You don't have to give your idea. So I think we see kids on both sides of the spectrum, like they've done really well in speaking and in communicating, and I'll add communication in there as well, like some
Sure.
form of communication, whether it be oral, written, whatever it may be, but their ability to communicate, to take risks, to listen, to work with others. I think those are qualities that we really work on with our students across the board, and also like in the classroom. And I think more importantly, we do this with like our mentorship and leadership group is we always start with our why. We always start with core values. Like that is always our first session, and that's led by me and our counselor. And it's like, if you don't know why you're doing this, if you don't know why you're doing this work, why you want to do blah blah blah, whatever you name that you want to do,
Right.
why are you doing that, and what do you value at your core? Like you have to stand firm in that, and then everything else is going to pass you, right? Like everything's going to happen, life's going to happen, everything, is going to stress you out, make you happy, whatever. But do you know what you believe in, and do you know why, you're here? And I think that we like to really underscore that with our student leaders at a very young age, because even if you say my mom, like that is important, and that is, a starting point, and that is powerful. So I think that we really teach that, and I would maybe be in a different place if I was taught that younger, but I think that I was taught that, for my family. But I think that if we had those conversations in a school setting, and I had that conversation in a school setting, like that would be incredibly powerful.
Yeah. I bet.
Have that conversation there.
Really cool. Yeah. Now, I've spin the question to the parents. What advice would you give parents such as myself to encourage better leadership?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that maybe those same qualities, but in reverse, right? Like,
Okay.
how are you listening to the teenager? How are you listening to the child, right? Like, how are you developing them to communicate? Or even if they are just 16 and don't want to talk to you, right? Like, how are you still modeling communication with them? And I think that a lot of those things are what we talked about earlier. Like, they're going through a whole bunch of things as teenagers that they will only go through as teenagers, and then like
Right.
then it's a lot better. But I think validating what they're feeling, validating that like that stress is real, I think it makes them believe in themselves a little bit more. Like, okay, they get it, it's
Yeah.
not me going crazy in my head. Like, absolutely. So I think, yeah, I love that question. But in thinking about communication and thinking about, risk taking, or, hey, you tried this and you did best you could. Maybe this isn't your thing. We're going to try something else. Like, you're good. It's fine. It's
Yeah.
not like the end of the world if they fail something. So practicing failure with teenagers, I think, is important. Like to know that you can fail something, not necessarily an assignment, but like a game or something that they want to do. They want to try drama and it was terrible, right? Like
Yeah.
that's not their thing. Okay, we're going to try something else, or try again. So I think that practicing risk taking with them and communicating, validating, their feelings, who they are, what they want to do. I think that's super powerful.
Yeah. I love that answer. That's great. Let's zoom out a little bit. If I were to ask you a question, are you optimistic about this country with everything that just recently happened? I would like to say we're past it, but I don't know if we're past it. So, are you optimistic that things are going to get better in this country?
Yeah, I'm optimistic. I think that there's definitely a change in leadership. But I think one of the things that I've come to know and better understand now that I've lived in Chicago for a bit of time now is the work that like community organizers do. And I think that you see people like, the work that Stacey Abrams did, to
Yeah.
organize and work with the people in Georgia. You saw the same thing with Latino communities in different states, in Arizona. Same. So, like, I think there's hope in my understanding of how the people have come together and organized and said, no, we have a strategy. This is what we need. This is what we're going to do. And if you don't do it, like, we've got each other until you do.
Yeah, I love
Um,
that.
and I think that, like, I know that that was there way before me. I know that, people have organized ancestors, people, in different countries, but also people here. There are people that have preceded me that do this work and have done it incredibly well. But I think that we don't learn about that. Like, we don't learn about that in sophomore
No, we
history.
don't.
Um, our kids do, but
Yeah.
I didn't. Like, I
Yeah.
certainly did not. So you just kind of think that everything's up to the powers that be. Like, I don't know. I don't have any control over this. I hope it works out. But now, and as I've lived in the city and better understood, the work of organizers and community organizers across the country, that makes me hopeful, and that makes me optimistic for what we can be. Because with things like social media, with things like, as negative and as toxic as it can be, it also brings people's stories forward that we maybe would normally not have heard.
Yeah.
And I think that, in doing that, that's powerful, and that will almost keep our hope alive and keep my optimism alive a little bit more.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I've learned so much over time, and I used to tell my friends like, hey, I'm Puerto Rican, but I never had a rough, like I don't never got the minority treatment, and it wasn't until I got older and I informed myself, and especially as of recent, what's happening, that I realized that, oh, that's because you were being one of them for this whole time. So you were getting by perfectly, but that's because you were modeling what they were telling you to model, and now. I don't I wouldn't use the word radicalized because I haven't done anything to flip anything upside down or change anybody's decision, but definitely a better understanding of where, my parents were sitting, their parents before them, and where we sit in this country as a culture. And, sometimes it's scary, but like you, I'm optimistic. And it's the people. Similar answer to yours. I think the people use government for better use of the term, or the powers that be, whatever they may be. But I keep telling people, you guys can have this fight all you want on social media about who's right and who's wrong. But if they separate you guys, they will always win, because it's only when people come together that you can, beat them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's a message that's spread out enough. And I don't even know if I'm correct, but I definitely know that if we're fighting each other, we're not doing the right thing. So back on the country, I saw on a Twitter post that you actually conversated with former President Barack Obama. Is that Did that happen?
So I wish.
Oh, okay.
If I had a conversation with Barack Obama, that would be amazing.
I thought you did
So
with the
if you're
post.
listening, no, I'm just kidding. We actually had our CPS leadership. They did
Okay.
we got an email and they said like, okay, we're gonna have a surprise guest on like at this time, and we're like, who's it gonna be? Like, who's this person gonna be? And then we're like, okay, we'll just log on to this Zoom call. And it was similar to this. It was Zoom call. We logged in. We were watching the live stream, but I told my family that he was speaking personally to me.
The truth comes out.
That's how I felt. So
Yeah.
it was super cool. They had like 10 or 12 students on there with him,
Nice.
and they were kind of talking. It was really great. It was really great.
Super cool. He's from Chicago as well, right?
He is. He
Okay.
is. Yeah.
Yeah. Super cool for the students.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great. And I think that, spaces like that and times like that to find opportunities for students to take on like real leadership roles and be out there and have to communicate with former President Barack Obama, like those are moments that if we can get more of that in schools, like that would be amazing.
I agree. I agree. So what's next for Barbara? What you got going on? What are you thinking for your near future, far future?
You know, in my near future is really getting kids back to school and getting back to um yeah, being in person. Like that, I think that I'm super excited. Like I shared earlier, like just came into this principal role in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of social movements, and like we've really embodied that and then said, okay, we need to make sure that this carries forward. Like we can't just go back to quote unquote normal
Yeah.
because normal was not good.
No, no, correct.
So I think that's really what's most immediately next for me is like coming back and really building this school that we've envisioned and that we've been working on. So that's definitely next. And then yeah, hopefully staying in this principalship for quite some time. And I think really what's next outside of that is how to create like opportunities to further connect with the community. And it not being like just in isolation, just leading the school, but how am I supporting those connections with the community? And then other than that, I will be finishing my doctoral program in March. So that hopefully that gets done in March, and then that's that. And then I will have some more free time in my life.
Super cool. You got a lot going on.
Yeah.
Just listening to you talk and what you got going on inspires me. I think, I'm envious, not in a bad way. I'm envious in a way that you touch and affect and change so many different lives. And I wish that I could put myself in that position to do so. And I'm working to get there. But Barbara, I really appreciate everything that you're doing. I wish my two teenagers were in an environment that you just described for me in this conversation. I don't think our local Worcester Public Schools is doing that, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
But
give me a call for that one as well.
Yeah, we definitely got to get into that one because I wish my kids were in a better environment. But I want to thank you for coming on the show. If you want to leave the fans anywhere they can follow you, where they can help support anything that you got going on, please do.
Yeah, no, thank you for being on here. And like I said, I think that places like this, connecting with people, from different places across the country, across the world, like these are powerful moments. So don't, this is just as powerful. And I appreciate you being here and inviting me on. Yeah, you can follow me at GW Principal on Twitter, and you can see all the cool stuff that we're doing in our school with our students, and then stay up to date on all things social justice through the work at our school.
Sweet. Thank you, Barbara, so much for coming on. I appreciate you. Hopefully this won't be the last time we speak.
Absolutely. All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining me for another great conversation. As always, I appreciate you guys. I love talking to selfless people like Barbara. They help me become a better person. They help me see where I can help in this world and be of value and be of service to others. And that is something that we all need more of. So pay attention to those people. As always, guys, if you appreciate this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe. That's how I continue to have the conversations I love to have, and you continue to get the conversations that you love to listen to. As always, guys, take care. Later.